Chapter 3. Of all that had occurred during many ensuing weeks, Edna knew little. She retained, in after years, only a vague, confused remembrance of keen anguish and utter prostration, and an abiding sense of irreparable loss. In delirious visions, she saw her grandfather now struggling in the grasp of Phlegias, and now writhing in the fiery tomb of Uberti, with jets of flame leaping through his white hair, and shrunken hands stretched appealingly toward her, as she had seen those of the doomed Ghibelline leader in the hideous Dante picture. All the appalling images evoked by somber and embittered imagination of the gloomy Tuscan had seized upon her fancy, even in happy hours, and were now reproduced by her disordered brain in multitudinous and aggravated forms. Her wails of agony, her passionate prayers to God to release the beloved spirit from the tortures which her delirium painted, were painful beyond expression to those who watched her ravings. It was with a feeling of relief that they finally saw her sink into apathy, into a quiet mental stupor from which nothing seemed to rouse her. She did not remark Mrs. Hunt's absence, or the presence of the neighbors at her bedside. And one morning, when she was wrapped up and placed by the fire, Mrs. Wood told her as gently as possible that her grandmother had died from a disease which was ravaging the country and supposed to be cholera. The intelligence produced no emotion. She merely looked up an instant, glanced mournfully around the dreary room, and, shivering slightly, drooped her head again and on her hand. Week after week went slowly by, and she was removed to Mrs. Wood's house, but no improvement was discernible, and the belief became general that the child's mind had sunk into hopeless imbecility. The kind-hearted miller and his wife endeavored to coax her out of her chair by the chimney-corner, but she crouched there, a wan, mute figure of woe, pitiable to contemplate, asking no questions, causing no trouble, receiving no consolation. One bright March morning she sat as usual, with her face bowed on her thin hand, and her vacant gaze fixed on the blazing fire, when through the open window came the impatient lowing of a cow. Mrs. Wood saw a change pass swiftly over the girl's face, and a quiver across the lips so long frozen. She lifted her head, rose, and followed the sound, and soon at the side of Brindle, who now furnished milk for the miller's family. As the gentle cow recognized and looked at her, with an expression almost human in the mild, liquid eyes, all the events of the last serene evening swept back to Edna's deadened memory, and, leaning her head on Brindle's horns, she shed the first tears that had flowed from her great loss, while sobs thick and suffocating shook her feeble, emaciated frame. "Bless the poor little outcast. She will get well now. That is just exactly what she needs. I tell you, Peter, one good cry like that is worth a wagon-load of physic. Don't go near her. Let her have her cry out. Poor thing. It ain't often you see a child love her granddaddy as she loved Aaron Hunt. Poor lamb." Mrs. Wood wiped her own eyes and went back to her weaving, and Edna turned away from the mill and walked to her deserted home, while the tears poured ceaselessly over her white cheeks. As she approached the old house, she saw that it was shut up and neglected. But when she opened the gate, Grip, the fierce yellow terror of the whole neighborhood, sprang from the doorstep, where he kept guard, as tirelessly as Mida, and with a dismal whine of welcome, leapt up and put his paws on her shoulders. This had been the blacksmith's pet, fed by his hand, chained when he went to the shop, and released at his return. A grim and repulsive, ugly though he was, the only playmate Edna had ever known, had gambolled under her cradle, slept with her on the sheepskin, and frolicked with her through the woods, in many a long search for Brindle. He alone remained all the happy past, and as precious memories crowded mournfully up, she sat upon the steps of the dreary homestead, with her arms around his neck, and wept bitterly. After an hour, she left the house, and, followed by the dog, crossed the woods in the direction of the neighborhood graveyard. In order to reach it, she was forced to pass by the spring and the green hillock where Mr. and Mrs. Dent slept side by side. But no nervous terror seized her now as formerly. The great present horror swallowed up all others, and though she trembled from physical debility, She dragged herself on the rude, rough path of the burying grounds stood and rough path of burial ground stood before her. O dreary desolation, thy name is country graveyard. Here no polished sculptured stela pointed to the eternal rest beyond. No classic marbles told, in gilded characters, the virtues of the dead. No flowery fringed gravel walks wound from murmuring waterfalls and rippling fountains to crystal lakes where trailing willows threw their flickering shadows over silver-dusted lilies. No spicy perfume of purple heliotrope and starry jasmine burdened the silent air. None of the solemn beauties and soothing charms of Greenwood or Mount Auburn wooed the mourner from her weight of woe. Decaying headboards, green with lichen-fingered touch of time, leaned over neglected mounds, where last year's wet weeds shivered in the sighing breeze, and autumn winds and winter rains had drifted a brown shroud of shriveled leaves, while here and there meek-eyed sheep lay sunning themselves upon the trampled graves, and the slow measured sound of a bell dinged now and then as cattle browsed on the scanty herbage in this most neglected of God's acres. Could Charles Lamb have turned from the pompous epitaphs and high-flown panegyrics of that English cemetery to the rudely lettered boards which here briefly told the names and ages of the sleepers in these narrow beds? He had never asked the question which now stands as a melancholy epigram on family favoritism and human frailty. Gold gilds even the lineaments and haunts of death, making Père Lachaise a favored spot for fêtes champêtres, while poverty hangs neither veil nor mask over the grinning ghoul and flees superstition spurned from the hideous precincts. In one corner of the enclosure, where Edna's parents slept, she found the new mounds that covered the remains of those who had nurtured and guarded her young life. And on an unpainted board was written in large letters, "To the memory of Aaron Hunt, an honest blacksmith and true Christian, aged 68 years and 6 months." Here, with her head on her grandfather's grave, and the faithful dog crouched at her feet, lay the orphan, wrestling with grief and loneliness, striving to face a future that loomed before her spectre thronged. And here Mr. Wood found her when anxiety at her long absence induced his wife to search for the missing invalid. The storms of sobs and tears had spent itself, fortitude took the measure of the burden imposed, shouldered the galling weight, and henceforth, with undimmed vision, walked steadily to the appointed goal. The miller was surprised to find her so calm, as they went homeward, she asked the particulars of all that had occurred, and thanked him gravely, but cordially, for the kind care bestowed upon her, and for the last friendly offices performed for her grandfather. Conscious of her complete helplessness and physical prostration, she ventured no allusion to the future, but waited patiently until renewed strength permitted her the execution of designs now fully mapped out. Notwithstanding her feebleness, she rendered herself invaluable to Mrs. Wood, who praised her dexterity and neatness as a seamstress, and predicted that she would make a model housekeeper. Late one Sunday evening, in May, as the miller and his wife sat upon the steps of their humble and comfortless-looking home, they saw Edna slowly approaching, and surmised where she had spent the afternoon. Instead of going into the house, she seated herself beside them, and, removing her bonnet, traces of tears were visible on her sad but patient face. "You ought not go over yonder so often, child. It's not good for you," said the miller, knocking the ashes from his pipe. She shaded her countenance with her hand, and after a moment said, in a low but steady tone, "I shall never go there again. I have said good-bye to everything, and have nothing now to keep me here. You and Mrs. Wood have been very kind to me, and I thank you heartily, but you have a family of children, and have your hands full to support them without taking care of me. I know that our house must go to you to pay that old debt, and even the horse and cow, and there will be nothing left when you are paid. You are very good, indeed, to offer me a home here, and I can never forget your kindness. But I should not be willing to live on anybody's charity, and besides, all the world is alike to me now, and I want to get out of sight of what shows my sorrow to me every day. I don't love this place now. It won't let me forget, even for a minute. And here the voice faltered, and she paused. But where could you go, and how could you make your bread, you poor little ailing thing? I hear that in the town of Columbus, Georgia, even little children get wages to work in the factory, and I know I can earn enough to pay my board among the factory people. But you are too young to be staying about in a strange place. If you will stay here and help my wife about the house and the weaving, I will take good care of you and clothe you till you are grown and married. I would rather go away, because I want to be educated, and I can't be if I stay here. Fiddlestick! You will know as much as the balance of us, and that is all you will ever have any use for. I notice you have a hankering after books, but the quicker you get that foolishness out of your head, the better. For books won't put bread in your mouth and clothes on your back, and folks that want to be better than their neighbors generally turn out worse. The less book learning you women have, the better. I don't see that it is any of your business, Peter Wood, how much learning women choose to get, provided your bread is baked and your socks darned when you want 'em. A woman has as good a right as any man to get book learning, if she wants it. And as for sense, I'll thank you mine is as good as yours any day. And folks have said it was a blessed thing for the neighborhood when the rheumatiz laid Peter Wood up, and his wife, Dorothy Elmira Wood, run the mill. Now it's of no earthly use to cut at us women over that child's shoulders. If she wants an education, she has as much right to it as anybody, if she can pay for it. My doctrine is, everybody has a right to whatever they can pay for, whether that is schooling or a satin frock. Mrs. Wood seized her snuff bottle and plunged a stick vigorously into the contents, and as the miller showed no disposition to skirmish, she continued, I take an interest in you, Edna Earl, because I loved your mother, who was the only sweet-tempered beauty that ever I knew. I think I never set my eyes on a prettier face, with big brown eyes as meek as a partridge's, and then her hands and feet were as small as a queen's. Now, as long as you are satisfied to stay here, I shall be glad to have you, and I will do as well for you as my own Tabitha. But, if you are bent on factory work and schooling, I have got no more to say, for I have no right to say where you shall go or where you shall stay. But one thing I do want to tell you. It is a serious thing for a poor, motherless girl to be all alone among strangers. There was a brief silence, and Edna answered slowly. Yes, Mrs. Wood, I know it is, but God can protect me there as well as here, and I have none now but him. I have made up my mind to go, because I think it is best for me, and I hope Mr. Wood will carry me to the Chattanooga depot tomorrow morning, as the train leaves early. I have a little money, $7, that Grandpa gave me at different times, and both Brindle's calves belong to me. He gave them to me, and I thought maybe you would pay me a few dollars for them. But you are not ready to start tomorrow? Yes, sir. I washed and ironed my clothes yesterday, and what few I have are all packed in my box. Everything is ready now, and, as I have to go, I might as well start tomorrow. Don't you think you will get dreadfully homesick in about a month, and write to me to come and fetch you back? I have no home, and nobody to love me. How, then, can I ever be homesick? Grandpa's grave is all the home I have, and God would not take me there when I was so sick, and the quiver of her face showed that she was losing her self-control, and turning away, she took the cedar piggin and went out to milk Brindle for the last time. Feeling that they had no right to dictate her future course, neither the miller nor his wife offered any opposition, and very early the next morning Mrs. Wood had given the girl what she called some good motherly advice, and provided her with a basket containing food for the journey. She kissed her heartily several times, and saw her stowed away in the miller's covered cart, which was to convey her to the railway station. The road ran by the old blacksmith's shop, and Mr. Wood's eyes filled as he noticed the wistful, lingering, loving gaze which the girl fixed upon it, until a grove of trees shut out the view. Then the head bowed itself, and a stifled moan reached his ears. The engine whistled as they approached the station, and Edna was hurried aboard the train. While her companion busied himself in transferring her box of clothing to the baggage car, she had insisted on taking her grandfather's dog with her, and, notwithstanding the horrified looks of the passengers and the scowl of the conductor, he followed her into the car, and threw himself under the seat, glaring at all who passed and looking as hideously savage as the Norse Menegarmar. "You can't have a whole seat to yourself, and nobody wants to sit near that ugly brute," said the surly conductor. Edna glanced down the aisle and saw two young gentlemen stretched at full length on separate seats, eyeing her curiously. Observing that the small seat next to the door was partially filled with luggage of the parties who sat in front of it, she rose, called to the dog, saying to the conductor as she did so, "I will take that half of a seat yonder, where I shall be in nobody's way." Here Mr. Wood came forward, thrust her ticket into her fingers, and shook her hand warmly, saying hurriedly, "Hold on to your ticket, and don't put your head out of the window. I told the conductor he must look after you and your box when you left the cars. Said he would. Goodbye, Edna. Take care of yourself, and may God bless you, child." The locomotive whistled, the train moved slowly on, and the miller hastened back to his cart. As the engine got fully under way and dashed around a curve, a small straggling village disappeared. Trees and hills seemed to the orphan to fly past the window, and when she leaned out and looked back, only the mantled rocks of Lookout and the dim purplish outline of the Sequatchie heights were familiar. In the shadows of that solitary sentinel peak, her life had been passed. She had gathered chestnuts and chinkapins among its wooded clefts, and clambered over its gray boulders as fearlessly as the young llamas of the Parim. And now, as it rapidly receded and finally vanished, she felt as if the last link of her that bound her to the past had suddenly snapped. The last friendly face which had daily looked down on her for 12 years was shut out forever, and she and Grip were indeed alone, in a great, struggling world of selfishness and sin. The sun shone dazzlingly over wide fields of grain, whose green billows swelled and surged under the freshening breeze. Golden butterflies fluttered over the pink and blue morning glories that festooned the rail fences. A brakeman whistled merrily on the platform, and children inside the car prattled and played, while at one end a slender little girlish figure, in homespun dress and pink calico bonnet, crouched in a corner of the seat, staring back in the direction of hooded Lookout, feeling that each instant bore her farther from the dear graves of her dead, and oppressed her with an intolerable sense of desolation and utter isolation in the midst of hundreds of her own race, who were too entirely absorbed in their individual speculations, fears, and aims, to spare even a glance at that solitary young mariner, who saw the last headland fade from view, and found herself with no pilot but ambition, drafting rapidly out of the great unknown, treacherous sea of life, strewn with mournful human wrecks, with whom charts and buoys of 6,000 years of navigation could not guide to a haven of usefulness and peace. Interminable seemed the dreary day, which finally drew to a close, and Edna, who was weary of her cramped position, laid her aching neck on the window-sill and watched the red light of day die in the west, where a young moon hung her silvery crescent among the dusky treetops, and the stars flashed out thick and fast. Far away among strangers, uncared for and unnoticed, come what might, she felt that God's changeless stars smiled down as lovingly upon her face as on her grandfather's grave, and that the cosmopolitan language of nature knew neither the modifications of time and space, the distinctions of social caste, nor the limitations of national dialects. As the night wore on, she opened the cherished copy of Dante and tried to read, but the print was too fine for the dim lamp which hung at some distance from her corner. Her head ached violently, and as she slept was impossible. She put the book back in her pocket and watched the fitting trees and fences, rocky banks, and occasional houses which seemed weird in the darkness. As silence deepened in the car, her sense of loneliness became more and more painful, and finally she turned and pressed her cheek against the fair, chubby hand of a baby who slept with its curly head on its mother's shoulder, and its little dimple arm and hand hanging over the back of the seat. There was a comfort and a soothing sensation of human companionship in the touch of that baby's hand. It seemed a link in the electric chain of sympathy, and after a time closed the orphan's eyes closed. Fatigue conquered memory and sorrow, and she fell asleep with her lips pressed to those mesmeric baby fingers, and Grip's head resting against her knee. Diamond-powered lilies of the field folded their perfumed petals under the Syrian dew, with wherewith God nightly baptized them in token of his ceaseless guardianship, and the sinless world of birds, the fowls of the air, those secure and blithe yet improvident little gleaners in God's granary, nestled serenely under the shadow of the Almighty wing. But was the all-seeing, all-directing eye likewise upon that desolate and destitute young mourner who sank to rest with "Our Father which art in heaven" upon her trembling lips? Was it a decree in the will and wisdom of our God, or a fiat from the blind fumbling of aesthetic chance, or was it in accordance with the rigid edict of pantheistic necessity that at that instant the cherubim of death swooped down on the sleeping passengers, and silver cords and golden bowls were rudely snapped and crushed amid the crash of timbers? The screams of women and children, and the groans of tortured men that made night hideous. Over the holy hills of Judea, out of crumbling Jerusalem, the message of Messiah has floated on the wings of 18 centuries. What I do thou knowest not now, but thou shalt not know hereafter. Edna was awakened by a succession of shrill sounds, which indicated that the engineer was either frightened or frantic. The conductor rushed barehanded through the car. People sprang to their feet. There was a scramble on the platform, then a shock and crash, as if the day of doom had dawned, and all was chaos. Chapter 4. Viewed by the aid of lanterns and the lurid flickering light of torches, the scene of disaster presented a ghastly debris of dead and dying, of crushed cars and wounded men and women who writhed and groaned among the shattered timbers from which they found it impossible to extricate themselves. The cries of those who recognized relatives in the mutilated corpses that were dragged out from the wreck increased the horrors of the occasion. When Edna opened her eyes amid the flaring of torches and the piercing wails of the bereaved passengers, the first impression was that she had died and gone to Dante's hell. But the pangs that seized her when she attempted to move soon dispelled this frightful illusion, and by degrees the truth presented itself to her blunted faculties. She was fast between timbers, one of which seemed to have fallen across her feet and crushed them. As she was unable to move them, she was conscious of a horrible sensation of numbness. One arm, too, was pinioned at her side, and something heavy and cold lay upon her throat and chest. Lifting this weight with her uninjured hand, she uttered an exclamation of horror, as the white face of the little baby whose fingers she had clasped now met her astonished gaze, and she saw the sweet coral lips were pinched and purple. The waxen lips lay rigid over the blue eyes, and the dimpled hand was stiff and icy. The confusion increased as day dawned, and a large crowd collected to offer assistance, and Edna watched her approaching deliverers as they cut their way through the wreck and lifted out the wretched sufferers. Finally, two men with their axes in hand bent down and looked into her face. "Here is a live child and a dead baby wedged in between these beams. Are you much hurt, little one?" "Yes, I believe I am. Please take this log off my feet." It was a difficult matter, but at length strong arms raised her, carried her some distance from the ruins, and placed her on the grass, where several other persons were writhing and groaning. The collision which precipitated the train from the trestle work over a deep ravine had occurred near a village station, and two physicians were busily engaged in examining the wounded. The sun had risen and shone full on Edna's pale, suffering face, when one of the surgeons, with a countenance that indexed earnest sympathy and compassion, came to investigate the extent of her injuries, and sat down on the grass beside her. Very tenderly he handed her, and after a few moments said gently, "I am obliged to hurt you a little, my child, for your shoulder is dislocated, and some of the bones are broken in your feet. But I will be as tender as possible. Here, Lennox, help me." The pain was so intense that she fainted, and after a short time, when she recovered her consciousness, her feet and ankles were tightly bandaged, and the doctor was chafing her hands and bathing her face with some powerful extract. Smoothing her hair, he said, "Were your parents on the cars? Do you know whether they are hurt?" "They both died when I was a baby." "Who was with you?" "Nobody but Grip, my dog." "Had you no relatives or friends on the train?" "I have none. I am all alone in the world." "Where did you come from?" "Chattanooga." "Where were you going?" "My grandpa died, and as I had nobody to take care of me, I was going to Columbus to work in the cotton factory." "Humph! Much work you will do for many a long day." He stroked his grayish beard and mused a moment, and Edna said timidly, "If you please, sir, I would like to know if my dog is hurt." The physician smiled, and looked round inquiringly. "Has anyone seen a dog that was on the train?" One of the brakemen, a stout Irishman, took his pipe from his mouth and answered, "Aye, aye, sir, and as vicious a brute as ever I set eyes on. Both his hind legs were smashed, dragged so, and I tapped on the head with an axe to put him out of his misery. Yonder he lies now on the track." Edna put her hand over her eyes and turned her face down on the grass to hide tears that would not be driven back. Here the surgeon was called away, and for a half-hour the child lay there, wondering what would become of her, in her present crippled and helpless condition, and questioning in her heart why God did not take her instead of her dimpled darling, whose parents were now weeping so bitterly for the untimely death that mowed their blossom ere its petals were expanded. The child belief was fast gaining ground that God had cursed and forsaken her, that misfortune and bereavement would dog her in steps through life, and hard, bitter expression settled about her mouth and looked out gloomily from the sad eyes. Her painful reverie was interrupted by the cheery voice of Dr. Rodney, who came back, accompanied by an elegantly dressed middle-aged lady. "Ah, my brave little soldier, tell us your name." "Edna Earle." "Have you no relatives?" asked the lady, stooping to scrutinize her face. "No, ma'am." "She is a very pretty child, Mrs. Murray, and if you can take care of her, even for a few weeks, until she is able to walk about, it will be a real charity. I never saw so much fortitude displayed by one so young, but her fever is increasing, and she needs immediate attention. Will it be convenient for you to carry her to your house at once?" "Certainly, doctor. Order the carriage driven up as close as possible. I brought a small mattress, and I think the ride will not be very painful. What splendid eyes she has, poor little thing. Of course, you will come and prescribe for her, and I will see that she is carefully nursed until she is quite well again. Here, Henry, you and your Richard must lift this child and put her on the mattress in the carriage. Mind you do not stumble and hurt her." During the drive, neither spoke, and Edna was in so much pain that as she lay with her eyes closed, as they entered a long avenue, the rattle of the wheels on the gravel aroused the child's attention, and when the carriage stopped, and she was carried up a flight of broad marble steps, she saw that the house was very large and handsome. "Bring her into the room next to mine," said Mrs. Murray, leading the way. Edna was soon undressed and placed within the snowy sheets of a heavily carved bedstead, whose crimson canopy shed a ruby light down on the laced and ruffled pillows. Mrs. Murray administered a dose of medicine given to her by Dr. Rodney, and after closing the blinds to exclude the light, she felt the girl's pulse, found that she had fallen into a heavy sleep, and then, with a sigh, went down to take her breakfast. It was several hours before Edna awoke. and when she opened her eyes and looked around the elegantly furnished and beautiful room, she felt bewildered. Mrs. Murray sat in a cushioned chair near one of the windows, with a book in her hand, and Edna had an opportunity of studying her face. It was fair, proud, and handsome, but wore an expression of habitual anxiety, and gray hairs showed themselves under the costly lace that bordered her mourning head-dress, while lines of care marked her brow and mouth. Children instinctively decipher the hieroglyphics which time carves on human faces, and reading in the countenance of her hostess, Edna felt that she was a haughty, ambitious woman, with a kind but not very warm heart, who would be scrupulously attentive to the wants of a sick child, but would probably never dream of caressing or fondling such a charge. Chancing to glance toward the bed as she turned a leaf, Mrs. Murray met the curious gaze fastened upon her, and, rising, approached the sufferer. "How do you feel, Edna? I believe that is your name." "Thank you. My head is better, but I am very thirsty." The lady of the house gave her some iced water in a silver goblet and ordered a servant to bring up the refreshments she had directed prepared. As she felt the girl's pulse, Edna noticed how white and soft her hands were, and how dazzlingly the jewels flashed on her fingers, and she longed for the touch of those aristocratic hands on her hot brow, where the hair clustered so heavily. "How old are you, Edna?" "Almost 13. "Had you any luggage on the train?" "I had a small box of clothes." "I will send a servant for it." She rang the bell as she spoke. "When do you think I shall be able to walk about?" "Probably not for many weeks. If you need or wish anything, you must not hesitate to ask for it. A servant will sit here, and you will only have to tell her what you want." "You are very kind, ma'am, and I thank you very much." She paused, and her eyes filled with tears. Mrs. Murray looked at her child and said gravely, "What is the matter, child?" I'm only sorry. I was so ungrateful and wicked this morning." "How so?" "Oh, everything that I love dies, and when I lay there on the grass, but unable to move, among strangers who knew and cared nothing about me, I was wicked and would not try to pray, and thought God wanted to make me suffer all my life, and I wished that I had been killed instead of that dear little baby who had a father and mother to kiss and love it. It was all wrong to feel so, but I was so wretched, and then God raised up friends, even among strangers, and shows me I am not forsaken if I am desolate. I begin to think, He took everybody away from me, that I might see how He could take care of me without them. I know He doeth all things well, but I feel now, and I am so sorry, I could not trust Him without seeing it." Edna wiped away her tears, and Mrs. Murray's voice faltered slightly as she said, "You are a good little girl, I have no doubt. Who taught you to be so religious?" "Grandpa." "How long since you lost him?" "4 months." "Can you read?" "Oh, yes, ma'am." "Well, I shall send you a Bible, and you must make yourself as contented as possible. I shall take good care of you." As the hostess left the room, a staid-looking elderly Negro woman took a seat at the window and sewed silently, now and then glancing toward the bed. Exhausted with pain and fatigue, Edna slept again, and it was night when she opened her eyes and found Dr. Rodney and Mrs. Murray at her pillow. The kind surgeon talked pleasantly for some time, and, after giving her ample instructions, took his leave, exhorting his patient to keep up her fortitude, and all would soon be well. So passed the first day of her sojourn under the hospitable roof which appeared so fortuitously to shelter her, and the child thanked God fervently for the kind hands into which she had fallen. Day after day wore wearily away, and at the end of a fortnight, though much prostrated by fever and suffering, she was propped up in bed by pillows, while Hagar the servant combed and plaited the long, thick, matted hair. Mrs. Murray came often into the room, but her visits were short, and though invariably kind and considerate, Edna felt an involuntary awe of her, which rendered her manner exceedingly constrained when they were together. Hagar was almost as taciturn as her mistress, and as the girl asked a few questions, she remained in complete ignorance of the household affairs, and had never seen anyone but Mrs. Murray, Hagar, and the doctor. She was well supplied with books, which the former brought from the library, and thus the invalid invalid contrived to amuse herself during long, tedious summer days. One afternoon in June, Edna persuaded Hagar to lift her to a large cushioned chair, close the open window, which looked out on the lawn, and here, with a book on her lap, she sat gazing out at the soft blue sky, the weaving elm boughs, and the glittering plumage of a beautiful Himalayan pheasant, which seemed in the golden sunshine to have forgotten the rosy glow of his native snows. Leaning her elbows on the window sill, Edna rested her face in her palms, and after a few minutes a tide of tender memories rose and swept over her heart, bringing a touching expression of patient sorrow to her sweet, wan face, and giving a far-off, wistful look to the beautiful eyes where tears often gathered but very rarely fell. Hagar had dressed her in a new white muslin wrapper, with fluttered ruffles at the wrists and throat, and the fair young face, with its delicate features and glossy folds of soft hair, was as pleasant a picture which the nurse loved to contemplate. Standing with her work basket in her hand, she watched the great, graceful little figure for 2 or 3 moments, and a warm, loving light shone over her black features. Then, nodding her head resolutely, she muttered, "I will have my way this once. Shall I stay?" and passed out of the room, closing the door behind her. Edna did not remark her departure, for memory was busy among the ashes of other days, exhuming 1,000 precious reminiscences of mountain home, chestnut groves, showers of sparks flinging an anvil with fire, and an old man's unpainted headboard in the deserted burying ground. She started nervously when a half hour later Mrs. Murray laid her hand gently on her shoulder and said, "Child, of what are you thinking?" For an instant she could not command her voice, which faltered, but making a strong effort, she answered in a low tone, "Of all that I have lost, and what I am to do in future." "Would you be willing to work all of your life in a factory?" "No, ma'am, only long enough to educate myself, so that I could teach." "You could not obtain a suitable education in that way, and beside, I do not think that the factory you spoke of would be an agreeable place for you. I have made some inquiries about it since you came here. I know that it will not be pleasant, but then I am obliged to work in some way, and I don't see what else I can do. I am not able to pay for an education now, and I am determined to have one." Mrs. Murray's eyes wandered out toward the velvety lawn, and she mused for some minutes. Then, laying her hands on the orphan's head, she said, "Child, will you trust your future and your education to me? I do not mean that I will teach you. Oh, no. But I will have you thoroughly educated, so that when you are grown, you can support yourself by teaching." "I have no daughter. I lost mine when she was a babe. But I could not have seen her enter a factory, as you remind me of your. But I could not have seen her enter a factory, and as you remind me of my own child, I will not allow you to go there. I will take care of and educate you. We'll see that you have everything that you require. If you are willing to be directed and advised by me, understand me. I do not adopt you, nor shall I consider you exactly as one of my family. But I shall prove a good friend and protector till you are 18 and capable of providing for yourself. You will live in my house and look upon it as your home, at least for the present. What do you say to this plan? It is not much better and more pleasant than a wild goose chase after an education through the dust and din of an old factory." "Oh, Mrs. Murray, you are very generous and good, but I have no claim on you, no right to impose such expense and trouble upon you. I am—" "Hush, child. You have that claim which poverty always has on wealth. As for the expense, that is mere trifle, and I do not expect you to give me any trouble. Perhaps you may even make yourself useful to me." "Thank you. Oh, thank you, Ma'am. I am very grateful. I cannot tell you how much I thank you, but I shall try to prove it, if you will let me stay here, on one condition." "What is that?" "That when I am able to pay you, you will receive the money that my education and clothes will cost you." Mrs. Murray laughed and stroked the silky black hair. "Where did you get such proud notions? Pay me, indeed, you poor little beggar. Ha, ha, ha! Well, yes, you may do as you please, when you are able, That time is rather too distant to be considered now. Meanwhile, quit grieving over the past, and think only of improving yourself. I do not like doleful faces, and I shall expect you to be cheerful, contented, and obedient girl. Hagar is making you an entire set of new clothes, and I hope to see you always neat. I shall give you a smaller room than this, the one across the hall. You will keep your books there, and remain there during study hours. At other times you can come to my room or amuse yourself as you like. And when there is company here, remember I shall always expect you to sit quietly and listen to the conversation, as it is very improving to young girls to be in really good society. You will have a music teacher, and practice upright piano in the library, instead of the large one in the parlor. One thing more. If you want anything, come to me and ask for it, and I shall be very much displeased if you talk to the servants or encourage them to talk to you. Now everything is understood, and I hope that you will be happy, and properly improve the advantages I shall give you. Edna drew out one of the white hands down her lips and murmured, "Thank you, thank you. You shall never have cause to regret your goodness, and your wishes will always guide me." "Well, well, I shall remember this promise, and trust I may never find it necessary to remind you of it. I dare say we shall get on very happily together. Don't thank me any more, and hereafter we need not speak of the matter." Mrs. Murray stooped, and for the first time kissed the child's white forehead, and Edna longed to throw her arms about the stately form, but the polished hauteur awed and repelled her. Before she could reply, and just as Mrs. Murray was moving toward the door, it was thrown open, and a gentleman strode into the room. At sight of Edna, he stopped suddenly, and, dropping a bag of game on the floor, exclaimed harshly, "What does this mean? My son, I am so glad you are at home again. I was getting quite uneasy at your long absence. This is one of the victims of that terrible railroad disaster. The neighborhood is full of the sufferers. Come to my room. When did you arrive?" She linked her arms in his, and picked up his game bag, and led him to the adjoining room, the door of which she closed and locked. A painful thrill shot along Edna's nerves, and an indescribable sensation of dread, a presentiment of coming ill, overshadowed her heart. This was the son of her friend, and the first glimpse of him filled her with instantaneous repugnance. There was an innate and powerful repulsion which she could not analyze. He was a tall, athletic man, not exactly young, yet certainly not elderly, one of anomalous appearance, prematurely old, and though not one white thread silvered his thick, white, waving brown hair, the heavy and habitual scowl on his high, full brow had plowed deep furrows such as age claims for its monogram. His features were bold, but very regular. The piercing steel-gray eyes were unusually large, and beautifully shaded with long, heavy black lashes that repelled by their cynical glare, and the fiery-formed mouth, which might have imparted a wonderful charm to the countenance, wore a chronic, savage sneer, as if it only opened to utter jeers and curses. Evidently, the face had once been singularly handsome in the dawn of his earthly career, when his mother's good-night kiss rested like a blessing on his smooth, boyish forehead, and the prayer learned in the nursery still crept across his pure lips. But now the fair, chiseled lineaments were bolted by dissipation, and blackened and distorted by the baleful fires of a fierce, passionate nature and a restless, powerful, and unhallowed intellect. Symmetrical and grand as the temple of Juno in shrouded Pompeii, whose polished shafts gleamed centuries ago in the morning sunshine of a day woe, whose untimely night has endured for 1900 years. So, in the glorious flush of his youth, the man had stood facing a noble and possibly a sacrificed future. But the ungovernable flames of sin reduced him, like that of darkened and desecrated fane, to a melancholy mass of ashy arches and blackened columns, where ministering priests, all holy aspirations slumbered in the dust. His dress was costly but negligent, and the red stain on his jacket told that his haunt had not been fruitless. He wore a straw hat, belted with broad black ribbon, and his spurred boots were damp and muddy. What was that there about this surly son of her hostess which recalled Edna to her mind her great grandfather's words? He is a rude, wicked, blasphemous man. She had not distinctly seen on the face of the visitor at the shop, but something in the impatient, querulous tone, in the hasty, haughty step, and the proud lifting of the regal head, reminded her painfully of him whose overbearing insolence had so unwontedly stirred the ire of Aaron Hunt's genial and generally equable nature. While she pondered this inexplicable coincidence, voices startled her from the next room, whence the sound floated through the window. If you were not my mother, I should say that you were a candidate for a straitjacket and a lunatic asylum. But as those amiable proclivities are considered hereditary, I do not favor that comparison. Sorry for her, indeed. I'll bet my right arm it will not be 6 weeks before she makes you infinitely sorrier for your deluded self, and you will treat me to a new version of Je me regrette. With your knowledge of this precious world and its holy crew, I confess it seems farcical in the extreme that open-eyed you can venture about another experiment on human nature. Some fine morning you will rub your eyes and find your acolyte non est, ditto your silver forks, diamonds, and gold spoons. Edna felt the indigent blood burning in her cheeks, and as she could not walk without assistance, and shrank from listening to a conversation which was not intended for her ears, she coughed several times to arrest the attention of the speakers, but apparently without effect, for the son's voice again rose above the low tones of the mother. "Oh, carnival of shams! She is pious, you say? Then I'll swear my watch she is not safe in my pocket, and I shall sleep with the key of my cameo cabinet tied around my neck. A Paris police would not insure your valuables or mine. The facts forbid that your pen-feathered saint should decamp with some of my costly travel scrapings. Pious indeed. Edna, forsooth! No doubt her origin and morals are quite as apocryphal as her name. Don't talk to me about her being providently thrown into your hands, unless you desire to hear me say things which you have frequently taken occasion to inform me deeply grieved you. I dare say the little vagrant whines in what she considers orthodox phraseology, that God tempers the wind to the shorn lamb, and, like some other pious people whom I have heard canting, will saddle some Jewish prophet or fisherman with the dictum, thinking that it sounds like a Bible, whereas Sterne said it. Shorn lamb, forsooth! We, or rather you, Madame ma mère, will be shorn thoroughly fleeced. Pious! Ha ha ha! Here followed an earnest expostulation from Mrs. Murray, only a few words which were audible, and once more the deep, strong, bitter tones rejoined. Interfere! Pardon me. I am only too happy to stand aloof and watch the little wretch play out her game. Most certainly it is your own affair, but you will permit me to be amused, will you not? And with your unaccustomed suavity, forgive me if I chance inadvertently to whisper above my breath. Les jeux n'en valent pas la chandelle. What the deuce do you suppose I care about her faith? She may run through the whole catalogue from mustard seed size up, as far as I am concerned, and you may make yourself the score of my contaminating this sacrificed vagrant. Saint Elmo, my son, promise me that you will not scoff and sneer at her religion, and at least in her presence, pleaded the mother. A ringing, mirthless laugh was the only reply that reached the girl, as she put her fingers in her ears and hid her face on the window-sill. It was no longer possible to doubt the identity of the stranger. The initials on the flyleaf meant Saint Elmo Murray, and she knew that the son of her friend and protectress, she had found the owner of her Dante, and the man who had cursed her grandfather for his tardiness. If she had only known this 1 hour earlier, she would have declined the offer, which one accepted. She knew not how to reject without acquainting Mrs. Murray with the fact that she had overheard the conversation, and yet she could not endure the prospect of living under the same roof with a man whom she loathed and feared. The memory of the blacksmith's aversion of this stranger intensified her own, as she pondered in shame and indignation the scornfulness and opprobrious epithets which he had bestowed on herself. She muttered through her set teeth, "Yes, Grandy, he is cruel and wicked, and I never can bear to look at or speak to him. How dared he curse my dear, dear, good grandpa? How can I ever be respectful to him, when he is not even respectful to his own mother? Oh, I wish I had never come here. I shall always hate him." At this juncture, Hagar entered and lifted her back to the couch, and remarking the agitation of her manner, the nurse said gravely as she put her fingers on the girl's pulse, "What has flushed you so? Your face is hot. You have tired yourself sitting up too long. Did a gentleman come into the room a while ago?" "Yes, Mrs. Murray's son." "Did Miss Ellen, that is my mistress, tell you that you were to live here and get your education?" "Yes, she offered to take care of me for a few years." "Well, I am glad it is fixed. So you can stay, for you to be a great comfort to Miss Ellen if you try to please her." She paused and busied herself about the room, and remembering Miss Murray's injunction that she should discourage conversation on the parts of the servants, Edna turned her face to the wall and shut her eyes, but for once Hagar's habitual silence and non-committalism were laid aside, and stooping over the couch, she said hurriedly, "Listen to me, child, for I like your patient ways, and I want to give you a friendly warning. You are a stranger in this house, and might stumble into trouble. Whatever else you do, be sure not to cross Massa Elmo's path. Keep out of his way, and he will keep out of yours, for he is shy enough of strangers, and would walk a mile to keep from meeting anybody. But if he finds you in his way, he will shod right through you, right over you, trample you. Nothing ever stops him one minute. When he makes up his mind, he does not even wait to listen to his mother, and she is about the only person who dares to talk to him. He hates everybody and everything, but he doesn't tread on folks' toes unless they are where they don't belong. He is a rattlesnake that crawls in his own track and bites everything that meddles or crosses his trail. Above everything, child, for the love of peace and heaven, don't argue with him. If he says black is white, don't contradict him. And if he swears water runs upstream, then let him swear. And don't know it runs down. Keep out of his sight, and you will do well enough, but once make him mad, and you had better fight Satan hand to hand with red-hot pitchforks. Everybody is afraid of him, and gives way to him, and you must like the balance that have to deal with him. I nursed him, but I would rather put my head in a wolf's jaws than stir him up. And God knows I wish he had died when he was a baby, instead of living to grow up the sinful, swearing, raging devil he is. Now mind what I say. I am not given to talking, but this time is for your good. Mind what I tell you, child, and if you want to have peace, keep out of his way." She left the room abruptly, and the orphan lay in the gathering gloom of twilight, perplexed and distressed, and wondering how she could avoid all the angularities of this amiable character, under whose roof fate seemed to have deposited her. Chapter 5. At length, by the aid of crutches, Edna was able to leave the room where she had been so long confined, and explore the house in which she had discovered some new charm. The parlors and sitting room opened on a long arched veranda, which extended about two sides of the building, and was paved with variegated tiles, while the stained glass doors of the dining room, with its soft, lofty frescoed ceiling and deep bow windows, led by two white marble steps up out on the terrace, when two more steps showed the beginning of a serpentine gravel walk winding down to an octagonal hothouse surmounted by a richly carved pagoda roof, two sentinel statues, a Bacchus and Bacchante, placed on the terrace, guarded an entrance to the dining room, and in front of the house, where a sepulchred Triton threw jets of water into a gleaming circular basin, a pair of crouching monsters glared from the steps. When Edna first roused herself before the grim doorkeepers, she stared back in unfeigned terror, and could scarcely repress a cry of alarm, for the howling rage and despair of the distorted, hideous heads seemed fearfully real, and years elapsed before she comprehended their significance, or the somber mood which impelled their creation. They were imitations of that monumental lion's head raised on the battlefield of Chaeronea to commemorate the Boeotians slain. In the rear and adjoining library, a narrow vaulted passage with high Gothic windows of stained glass opened into a beautifully proportioned rotunda, and beyond this circular apartment, with its ruby-tinted skylight and Moresque frescoes, extended two other rooms, whose shape or contents Edna knew nothing, save the tall arched windows that looked down on the terrace. The door of the rotunda was generally closed, but accidentally it stood open one morning, and she caught a glimpse of the circular form and the springing dome. Evidently this portion of the mansion had been recently built, while the remainder of the house had been constructed many years earlier. But all desire to explore was extinguished when Mrs. Murray remarked one day, "That passage leads to my son's apartments, and he dislikes noise or intrusion." Thenceforth Edna avoided it, as if the plagues of Pharaoh were pent therein. To her dazzled eyes, this luxurious home was a fairy palace, an enchanted region, and with eager curiosity and boundless admiration, she gazed upon beautiful articles whose use she could not even conjecture. The furniture through the mansion was elegant and costly. Pictures, statues, bronzes, marble, silver, rosewood, ebony, mosaics, satin, velvet, naught that the most fastidious and cultivated taste or dilettantism could suggest, or lavish expenditure supply, was wanting. Where the elaborate and beautiful arrangement of the extensive grounds showed with how prodigal a hand the owner squandered in a princely fortune. The flower garden and lawn comprised 15 acres, and the subversions were formed entirely by hedges, save the portion of the park surrounded by tall iron railing, where congregated a motley menagerie of deer, bison, Lapland reindeer, a Peruvian llama, some Kashmir goats, a chamois, wounded and caught on the Jungfrau, and large white cow from Ava. This part of the enclosure was thickly studded with large oaks, groups of beech and elm, and a few enormous cedars, which would not have shamed their scared prototypes, sighing in Syrian breezes along the rocky gorges of Lebanon. The branches were low and spreading, and even at midday the sunshine barely freckled the cool, mossy knolls where the animals sought refuge from the summer heat and of the open and smoothly shown lawn. Here and there, on the soft green sward, was presented that vegetable antithesis, a circlet of marionette poplars standing vis-a-vis to a clump of willows, whose long hair threw quivering, fringy shadows when the slanting rays of dying sunlight burnished the white and purple petals nestling among the clover tufts. Rustic seats of bark, cane, and metal were scattered through the grounds, and where the well-trimmed, numerous hedges divided the parterre, china, marble and iron vases of varied mold held rare creepers and lovely exotics, and rich masses of roses swung their fragrant chalices of crimson and gold, rivaling the glory of Paestum and of Bendemeer. The elevation upon which the house was placed commanded an extensive view of the surrounding county. Far away to the northeast, purplish-gray waves along the sky showed a range of lofty hills, and in an easterly direction, scarcely 2 miles distant, glittering spires told where the village clung to the railroad, and to a deep, rushing creek, whose sinuous course was distinctly marked by the dense growth that clothed its steep banks. Now and then, luxuriant fields of corn covered the level lands with an emerald mantle, while sheep and cattle roamed through the adjacent campaign. And in the calm, cool morning air, a black smoked serpent crawled above the treetops, mapping out the track over which the long train of cars darted and thundered. Mr. Paul Murray, the first proprietor of the estate and father of the present owner, had early in life spent much time in France, where espousing the royalist cause, his sympathies were fully enlisted by the desperate daring of Charette, Soufflet, and Cathalinot. On his return to his native land, his admiration of the heroism of those who dwelt upon the Loire found expression in one of their sobriquets, Le Bocage, which he gave to his county residence, and certainly the venerable groves that surrounded it justified the application. While his own fortune was handsome and abundant, he married the orphan of a rich banker, who survived her father only a short time and died leaving Mr. Murray childless. After a few years, when the frosts of age fell upon his head, he married a handsome and very wealthy widow, but unfortunately, having lost their first child, a daughter, he lived only long enough to hear the infantile prattle of his son, Elmo, to whom he bequeathed an immense fortune, which many succeeding years of reckless expenditure had failed to materially impair. Such was Le Bocage. Naturally a beautiful situation, improved and embellished with everything which refined taste and worldwide travel could suggest to the fastidious owner. Notwithstanding the countless charms of the home so benevolently offered to her, the blacksmith's granddaughter was conscious of a great need, scarcely to be explained, yet fully felt the dreary lack of that which she had yet to learn could not be purchased by the treasures of Aude. The priceless peace and genial glow which only the contented, happy hearts of its inmates can diffuse, or even a palatial homestead. She also realized, without analyzing the fact, that the majestic repose and boundless spontaneity of nature yielded a sense of companionship, almost of tender, dumb sympathy, which all the polished artificialities and recherche arrangements of man utterly failed to supply. While dazzled by the glitter and splendor of Le Bocage, she shivered in its silent dreariness, its cold aristocratic formalism, and she yearned for the soft musical babble of the spring branch, where, standing ankle-deep in water under the friendly shadow of Lookout, she had spent long, blissful July days in striving to build a wall of rounded pebbles down which the crystal ripples would fall, a miniature Tallulah or Tocoa. The chrism of nature had anointed her early life and consecrated her heart, but fate brought her to the vestibule of the temple of Mammon, and its defiling incense floated about her. How long would the consecration last? As she slowly limped about the house and grounds, acquainting herself with the details, she was impressed with the belief that happiness had once held her court here, had been dethroned, exiled, and now waited beyond the confines of the park, anxious but unable to renew her reign and expel usurping gloom. For some weeks after her arrival, she took her meals in her own room, and having learned to recognize the hasty, heavy tread of the dreaded master of the house, she invariably fled from the sound of his steps, as she would have shunned an ogre. Consequently, her knowledge of him was limited to the brief inspection and uncomplimentary conversation which introduced him to her acquaintance on the day of his return. Her habitual avoidance and desire of continued concealment was, however, summarily thwarted when Mrs. Murray came to her room late one night and asked, "Did I not see you walking this afternoon without your crutches?" "Yes, ma'am. I was trying to see if I could not do without them entirely." "Did the experiment cause you pain?" "No pain exactly, but I find my ankles still weak." "Be careful not to overstrain it. By degrees it will strengthen if you use it moderately. By the by, you are now well enough to come to the table, and from breakfast tomorrow you will take your meals with us in the dining room." A shiver of apprehension seized Edna, and in a frightened tone she ejaculated, "Ma'am!" I say in future you will eat at the table instead of here in this room. If you please, Mrs. Murray, I would rather stay here. Pray what possible objection you could have to the dining room? Edna averted her head, but wrung her fingers nervously. Mrs. Murray frowned, and continued gravely. Don't be silly, Edna. It is proper that you should go to the table, and learn to eat with a fork instead of a knife. You need not be ashamed to meet people. There is nothing clownish about you, unless you affect it. Good night. I shall see you at breakfast. The bell rings at 8 o'clock. There was no escape, and she woke next morning oppressed with the thought of the ordeal that awaited her. She dressed herself even more carefully than usual, despite the trembling of her hands, and when the ringing of the little silver bell summoned her to the dining room, her heart seemed to stand still. But though exceedingly sensitive and shy, Edna was brave and even self-possessed, and she promptly advanced to meet the trial. Entering the room, she saw that her benefactress had not yet come in, but was approaching the house with a basket of flowers in her hand, and one swift glance around discovered Mr. Murray standing at the window. Unobserved, she scanned the tall, powerful figure clad in a suit of white linen, and saw that he wore no beard, save the heavy but closely trimmed mustache, which now in some degree concealed the harshness about the handsome mouth. Only his profile turned toward her. She had noticed that while his forehead was singularly white, his cheeks and chin were thoroughly bronzed from exposure. As Mrs. Murray came in, she nodded her young protege and approached the table, saying, "Good morning. It seems I laggard today, but Nicholas has mislaid the flower shears and detained me. Hereafter I shall turn over the work of dressing vases to you, child. My son, this is your birthday, and here is your buttonhole souvenir." She fastened a few sprigs of white jasmine in his linen coat, and he thanked her briefly, and turned to the table, she said with marked emphasis, "Sin Elmo, let me introduce you to Edna Earle." He looked around and fixed his eyes keen on the orphan, whose cheeks crimsoned as she looked down, and said quite distinctly, "Good morning, Mr. Murray." "Good morning, Miss Earle." "No, I protest, Miss Earle. Indeed, call the child Edna." "As you please, mother, provided you do not let the coffee and chocolate get cold while you decide the momentous question." Neither spoke again for some time, and the embarrassing silence kept Edna on the china, wondering if all their breakfasts would be like this. At last Mr. Murray pushed away his large coffee cup and said abruptly, "After all, it is only 1 year today since I came back to America, though it seems much longer. It will soon be time to prepare for my trip to the South Sea Islands. The stagnation here is intolerable." An expression of painful surprise flitted across the mother's countenance, but she answered quickly, "It has been an exceedingly short, happy year to me. You are such a confirmed absentee that when you are home, time slips by unnoticed. But few and far between, as my visits are, they certainly never approach the angelic. Welcome the coming speed. The parting guest must frequently recur to you." Before his mother could reply, he rose, ordered his horse, and as he drew on his gloves and left the room, looked over his shoulder, saying indifferently, "That box of pictures from Munich is at the warehouse. I directed Henry to go after it this morning. I will open it when I come home." A moment after he passed the window on horseback, and with a heavy sigh, Mrs. Murray dropped her head on her hand, compressing her lips and toying abstractedly with the sugar tongs. Edna watched the grave, troubled countenance for some seconds, and then, putting her hand on the flower basket, she asked softly, "Shall I dress the flower pots?" "Yes, child. In 4 rooms. This, the parlors, and the library. Always cut the flowers very early, while the dew is on them." Her eyes went back to the sugar tongs, and Edna joyfully escaped from a room whose restraints and associations were irksome. Impressed by Hagar's vehement adjuration to keep out of Mr. Murray's path, she avoided those portions of the house to which he seemed most partial, and thus, although they continued to meet at meals, no words passed between them. after that brief salutation on the morning of the presentation. Very often she was painfully conscious that his searching eyes scrutinized her, but though the bold blood mounted instantly to her cheeks at such times, she never looked up, dreading his gaze as she would on that of a basilisk. One sultry afternoon, into the park and threw herself down on the long grass under a clump of cedars, near which the deer and bison were quietly browsing, while the large white merinos huddled in the shade and blinked up at the sun. On a pictorial history of England, which she had selected from the library, she spread it on the grass, and leaning her face in her palms, rested her elbows on the ground and began to read. Now and then she paused as she turned a leaf to look around at the beautiful animals, each of which might have served as a model for Landseer or Rosa Bonheur. Gradually, the languor of the atmosphere stole into her busy brain. As the sun crept down the sky, her eyelids sunk with it, and very soon she was fast asleep, with her head on the book and her cheeks flushed almost to a vermilion hue. From that brief summer dream, she was aroused by some sudden noise, and starting up, she saw sheep bounding far away, while a large, gaunt, wolfish gray dog snuffed at her hands, and face. Once before she had seen him chained near the stables, and Hagar told her he was very dangerous, and was never loosed except at night. Consequently, the expression of his fierce red eyes, as he stood over her, was well calculated to alarm her. But at that instant, Mrs. Murray's voice thundered, "Keep still! Don't move, or you will be torn to pieces!" Then followed some rapid interjections and vehement words in the same unintelligible dialect which had so puzzled her once before, when her grandfather could not control the horse he was attempting to shoe. The dog was sullen and unmanageable, keeping his black muzzle close to her face, as she grew pale with terror, as she noticed that his shaggy breast and snarling jaws were dripping with blood. Leaping from his horse, Mr. Murray strode up, and with a quick movement seized the heavy brass collar of the savage creature, hurled him back on his haunches, and held him thus, giving vent the while to a volley of oaths. Pointing to a large, half-decayed elm branch lying at a little distance, he tightened his grasp on the collar, and said to the still trembling girl, "Bring me that stick yonder." Edna complied, and there ensued a scene of cursing, thrashing, and howling that absolutely sickened her. The dog writhed, leaped, whined, and snarled, but the iron hold was not relaxed, and the face of the master rivaled in rage that of the brute, which seemed as ferocious as the hounds of Gian Maria Visconti, fed with human flesh. By Scarsia Girolamo, distressed by the severity and duration of the punishment, and without pausing to reflect or remember Hagar's warning, Edna interposed. "Oh, please don't whip him any more. It is cruel to beat him so." Probably he did not hear her, and the blows fell thicker than before. She drew near, and as the merciless arm was raised to strike, she seized it with both hands and swung on with her whole weight, repeating her words. If one of his meek, frightened sheep had sprung at his throat to throttle him, Mr. Murray would not have been more astounded. He shook her off, threw her from him, but she carried the stick in her grasp. "Damn you! How dare you interfere? What is it to you if I cut his throat, which I mean to do? That will be cruel and sinful, for he does not know it is wrong, and besides, he did not bite me." She spoke resolutely, and for the first time ventured to look straight into his flashing eyes. "Did not bite you? Do not worry down and do not. Did not he worry down and mangle one of my finest Southdowns? It would serve you right for your impertinent meddling, if I let him tear you limb from limb." "He knows no better," she answered firmly. "Then by God I will teach him. Hand me that stick." "Oh, please, Mr. Murray, you have nearly put out one of his eyes already." "Give me the stick, I tell you, or I—" He did not finish the threat, but he held out his hand with a peremptory gesture. Edna gave one swift glance around, saw that there were no other branches within reach, saw that the dog's face was swelling and bleeding from its bruises, and, bending the stick across her knee, she snapped it into 3 pieces, which she threw as far as her strength would permit. There was a brief pause, broken only by the piteous howling of the suffering creature, and, as she began to realize what she had done, Edna's face reddened, and she put her hands over her eyes to shut out the vision the vision of the enraged man, who was absolutely dumb with indignant astonishment. Presently, a sneering laugh caused her to look through her fingers as she saw Allie, the dog, now released, fawning and whining at his master's feet. Aha! The way of natures, human as well as brute. Pet and fondle pamper them. They turn under your caressing hand and bite you, but bruise and trample them, and instantly they are on their knees licking the feet that kicked them. Begone, you bloodthirsty devil! I'll settle the account at the kennel. Buffoon is a fool, and Pennant was right after all. The blood of the jackal pricks up your ears. He spurned the crouching culprit as it slunk away in the direction of the house. Edna found herself alone, face to face with the object of her aversion, and she almost wished that the earth would open and swallow her. Mr. Murray came close to her, held her hands down with one of his, and placing the other under her chin, forced her to look at him. How dare you defy and disobey me? I did not defy you, sir, but I could not help you do what was wrong and cruel. I am the judge of my actions, and neither ask your help, nor intend to permit your interference with what does not concern you. God is the judge of mine, sir, and if I had obeyed you, I should have been guilty of all that you wished to do with that stick. I do not want to interfere, sir. I try to keep out of your way, and I am very sorry that I happened to come here this evening. I did not dream of meeting you. I thought you had gone to town. He read all her aversion in her eyes, which strove to avoid his, and smiling gently, he continued, You evidently think that I am the very devil himself, walking the earth like a roaming lion. Mind your own affairs hereafter, and when I give you a positive order, obey it, for I am master here, and my word is law. Meddling or disobedience I neither tolerate nor forgive. Do you understand me? I shall not meddle, sir. That means that you will not obey me unless you think it proper. She was silent, and her beautiful soft eyes filled with tears. Answer me! I have nothing to say that you would like to hear. What? Out with it! You would have a right to think me impertinent if I said any more. No, I swear I will not devour you, say what you may. She shook her head, and the motion brought 2 tears down her cheeks. Oh, you are one of the stubborn sweet saints, whose lips even Torquemada's red-hot steel fingers could not open. Child, do you hate or dread me most? Answer the question. He took his own handkerchief and wiped away the tears. I am sorry for you, sir, she said in a low voice. He threw his head back and laughed heartily. Sorry for me? Sorry for me? Me? The owner of as many thousands as there are hairs on your head. Keep your pity for your poverty-stricken vagrant self. Why the deuce are you sorry for me? She withdrew her hands, which he seemed to hold unconsciously, and answered, Because, with all your money, you never will be happy. And what the devil do I care for happiness? I am not such a fool as to expect it, and yet, after all, out the mouths of babes and sucklings. Pshaw! I am a fool, nevertheless, to waste words on you. Stop! What do you think of my park and the animals? I noticed you often come here. The first time I saw it, I thought of Noah and the ark, with 2 of every living thing. But an hour ago, it seemed to me more like the Garden of Eden, where the animals all lay down together in peace, before sin came into it. And Ali and I entered like Satan and completed the vision. Thank you, considering the fact that you are on my premises and know something of my angelic sanctified temper. I must say you indulge in bold fights of imagery." "I did not say that." "You thought it, nevertheless. Don't be hypocritical. Is not that what you thought of?" She made no reply, and anxious to terminate an interview painfully embarrassing to her, stepped forward to pick up the history which lay on the grass. "What book is that?" She handed it to him, and the leaves happened to open on a picture representing the murder of Becket. A scowl blackened on his face as he glanced at it, and turned away, muttering, "Malice, prepense, or the devil." At a little distance, leisurely cropping the long grass, stood his favorite horse, whose arched forehead and peculiar mouse color proclaimed his unmistakable descent from the swift hordes that scoured the Kirksey steps and sanctioned the whim which induced his master to call him Tamerlane. As Mr. Murray approached his horse, Edna walked away toward the house, fearing that he might overtake her, but no sound of hoofs reached her ears, and looking back as she crossed the avenue and entered the flower garden, she saw horse and rider standing where she had left them, and wondered why Mr. Murray was so still, with one arm on the neck of his Tartar pet, and his own head bent on his hand. In reflecting upon what had occurred, she felt her repugnance increase, and began to think that they could not live in the same house without continual conflicts, which would force her to abandon the numerous advantages now within her grasp. The only ray of hope darted through her mind when she recalled his allusion to a contemplated visit to the South Sea Islands, and the possibility of his long absence. Insensibly, her dislike of the owner extended to everything he handled, and much as she had enjoyed the per usual of Dante, she determined to lose no time in restoring the lost volume, which she felt very well assured his keen eyes would recognize the first time she inadvertently left it in the library or the greenhouse. The doubt of her honesty, which he had expressed to his mother, rankled the orphan's memory, and for some days she had been nerving herself to anticipate a discovery of the book by voluntarily restoring it. The rencontre in the park by no means diminished her dread of addressing him on the subject, but she resolved that the rendition of Caesar's things to Caesar should take place that evening before she slept. Chapter 6. The narrow vaulted passage leading to Mr. Murray's suite of rooms was dim and gloomy when Edna approached the partially opened door of the rotunda, whence issued a stream of light. Timidly she crossed the threshold and stood within on the checkered floor, whose polished tiles glistened under the glare of gas from bronze brackets representing telemones that stood at regular intervals around the apartment. The walls were painted in Saracenic style, and here and there hung specimens of Oriental armor, Turcoman scimitars, Damascus swords, Bedouin lances, and crimson silk flag with heavy gold fringe, surmounted by a crescent. The cornice of the lofty arched ceiling was elaborately arabesque, and as Edna looked up, she saw the glass roof flickering of stars and in the summer sky. In the center of the room, immediately under the dome, stretched a billiard table, and near it was a circular one of black marble, inlaid with red onyx and lapis lazuli, which formed a miniature zodiac similar to that at Dendera, while the middle of this table sat at a small Murano hourglass filled with sand from the dreary valley of El Gore. A huge plaster Trimurti stood close to the wall on a triangular pedestal of black rock, and the Siva face and the writhing cobra confronted all who entered. Just opposite grinned a red granite slab with a quaint basso relievo taken from the ruins of Allora. Near the door were two silken divans and a richly carved urn, 3 feet high, which had once ornamented the facade of a tomb and in the royal days of Petra, ere the curse fell on Edom, now stood an in memoriam of the original necropolis. For what purpose this room was designed or used, Edna could not imagine, and after a hasty survey of its singular furniture, she crossed the rotunda and knocked at the door that stood slightly ajar. All was silent, but the smell of a cigar told her that the owner was within, and she knocked once more. "Come in." "I don't wish to come in. I only want to hand you something." "Oh, the deuce you don't! But I never meet people even halfway. So come in if you must, if you have anything to say to me. I have neither blue blazes nor pitchforks about me, and you will be safe inside. I give you my word. There shall be no devils shut up here, to fly away with whomsoever peeps in. Either enter, I say, or be off." The temptation was powerful to accept the alternative, but as he had evidently recognized her voice, she pushed open the door and reluctantly entered. It was a long room, and at the end were two beautiful white marble pillars supporting a handsome arch, where hung heavy curtains of crimson Persian silk. They were now partially looped back, showing the furniture of the sleeping apartment beyond the richly carved arch. For a moment, the bright light dazzled the orphan, and she shaded her eyes. But the next instant, Mr. Murray rose from a sofa near the window and advanced a step or two, taking a cigar from his lips. "Come to the window and take a seat." He pointed to the sofa, but she shook her head and said quickly, "I have something which belongs to you, Mr. Murray, which I think you must value very much, and therefore I wanted to see it safe in your own hands." Without raising her eyes, she held the book toward him. "What is it?" He took it mechanically, and with his gaze fixed on the girl's face. But as she had made no reply, he glanced down at it, and his stern, swarthy face lighted up joyfully. "Is it possible? My Dante! My lost Dante! The copy that has traveled round the world in my pocket, that I lost a year ago, somewhere in the mountains of Tennessee. Girl, where did you get it?" "I found it where you left it, on the grass near a blacksmith's shop." "A blacksmith's shop? Where?" "Near Chattanooga. Do you remember the sign under the horseshoe, over the door, Aaron Hunt?" "No, but who was Aaron Hunt?" For nearly a minute Edna struggled for composure, and looking up suddenly, said falteringly, "He was my grandfather, the only person in the world I had to care for, or to love me. And, sir—" "Well, go on." "You cursed him because your horse fretted, and he could not shoe him in 5 minutes." "Humph." There was an awkward silence. Elmo Murray bit his lip and scowled, and, recovering her self-control, the orphan added, "You put your shawl and book on the ground, and when you started, you forgot them. I called you back and gave you your shawl, but I did not see the book for some time after you rode out of sight." Yes, I remember now, about the shawl in the shop. Strange I didn't recognize you before. But how did you learn that the book was mine?" "I did not know it was yours until I came here by accident, and heard Mrs. Murray call your name. Then I knew that the initials written in the book spelt your name. And besides, I remember your figure and your voice." Again there was pause, and her mission ended. Edna turned to go. "Stop! Why did you give it to me then? Why did you not give it to me when you first came?" She made no reply, and putting her hand on her shoulder to detain her, he said more gently than she ever had heard him speak to anyone, "Was it because you loved my book and disliked to part with it, or was it because you feared to come and speak to a man whom you hate? Be truthful." She was silent, and raising her face with his palm, as she had done in the park, he continued in the same low, sweet voice, which she could scarcely believe belonged to him. "I am waiting for your answer, and I intend to have it." Her large, sad eyes were brimming with precious memories, as she lifted them steadily to meet his, and answered, "My grandfather was a noble and a good, and he was all I had in this world, and you cannot forgive a man who happened to be rude to him. If you please, Mr. Murray, I would rather go now. I have given you your book. That is all I came for." "Which means that you are afraid of me and want to get out of my sight?" She did not deny it, but her face flushed painfully. "Edna Earle, you are at least honest and truthful, and those are rare traits at the present day. I thank you for preserving and returning my Dante. Did you read any of it? Yes, sir, all of it. Good night, sir. Wait a moment. When did Aaron Hunt die? 2 months after you saw him. You have no relatives, no cousins, uncles, aunts? None that I ever heard of. I must go, sir. Good night, child. For the present. When you go out into the grounds, be sure that Wolf Ali is chained up, or you may be sorry that I did not cut his throat, as I am still inclined to do. She closed the door, ran lightly across the rotunda, and regaining her own room, felt inexpressibly relieved that the ordeal was over, that in the future there remained no necessity for her to address one whose very tones made her shudder, and the touch of whose hand filled her with vague dread and loathing. When the echo of her retreating footsteps died away, Elmo threw his cigar out of the window, and walked up and down the quaint, elegant room, whose costly bizarrerie would more appropriately have adorned a villa parthenope of Lucien Sybaris than a country house in distant Republican America. The floor, covered in winter with velvet carpet, was of white and black marble, now bare and polished as a mirror, reflecting the figure of the owner as he crossed it. Oval armor-ruled tables, bull chairs, and oaken and marqueterie cabinets loaded with cameos, intaglios, abraxoids, whose erudition would have filled Minnesarchus with envy, and challenged the admiration of the Samian lapidary, one who engraved the ring of Polycrates, and these numberless articles of virtu testified to the universality of what St. Elmo called his world scrapings, and to the reckless extravagance and archaistic taste of the collector. On a verdantique table lay a satin cushion holding a vellum MS, bound in blue velvet, whose uncial letters were written in purple ink powdered with gold dust, while the margins were stiff with gilded illuminations, and near the cushion, as if prepared to shed light on curious cryptography, stood an exquisite white glass lamp, shaped like a vase, and richly ornamented with Arabic inscriptions in ultramarine blue, a precious relic of some ruined Laura in the Nitration desert, by the aid of whose rays the hoary hermits, whom Saint Macarius ruled, broke the midnight gloom, chanting Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, 400 years before St. Elmo's birth. Immediately opposite, on an embossed ivory stand and protected from the air and dust by glass case, were two antique goblets, one of green-veined agate, one of blood-red onyx, and onto the coating of wax spread along the ivory slab were inserted amphorae, one dry and empty, the other a third full of Valerian, whose topaz drops had grown strangely mellow and golden in the ashy cellars of Herculaneum, and had doubtless been destined for some luxurious triclinium in the days of Titus, a small Byzantine picture, painted on wood, with a silver frame ornamented with cornelian stars, and the background heavily gilded, hung over an etagre, where lay a leaf from Nebuchadnezzar's diary, one of those Babylonish bricks on which his royal nape was stamped. Near it stood a pair of Bohemian vases representing the two varieties of lotus, one velvety white with rose-colored veins, the other with delicate blue petals. The latter whim had cost a vast amount of time, trouble, and money, it having been found difficult to carefully preserve, sketch, and paint them for the manufacturer in Bohemia, who had never seen the holy lotus, and required specimens. But the indomitable will of the man to whose wishes neither oceans nor deserts opposed stressful barriers, finally triumphed, and the coveted treasures fully repaid their price as they glistened in the gaslight, perfect as their prototypes slumbering on the bosom of the Nile, under the blazing midnight stars of rainless Egypt. Several handsome rosewood cases were filled with rare books, two in Pali, centuries old, and moth-eaten volume and valuable MSS. Some in parchment, some bound in boards, recalled the days of astrology and alchemy, and the somber mysteries of Rosicrucianium. Side by side, on an ebony stand, lay an Elzevir Terrace, printed in letters and a curious Burman book, whose pages consisted of thin leaves of ivory, gilded at the edges. And here too were black Raita from Chiusi, and a Silix from Vulci, and one of those quaint Peruvian jars which was so constructed that when filled with water, the air escaped in sounds that resembled that of the song or cry of the animal represented in the vase or jar. In the space between the tall windows that fronted the lawn hung a weird, life-size picture that took strange hold on the imagination of all who looked at it. A gray-haired Cimbrian prophetess in white vestments and brazen girdle, with canvas mantle fastened on the shoulder by a broad brazen clasp, stood with bare feet on low, rude scaffolding, leaning upon her sword, and eagerly watching with divine eyes the stream of blood which trickled from the throat of the slaughtered human victim down into the large brazen kettle beneath the scaffold. The snowy locks and white mantle seemed to flutter in the wind, and those who gauzed on the stony, inexorable face of the prophetess, and into the glittering blue eyes, shuddered and almost fancied they heard the pattering of the gory stream against the sides of the brass cauldron. But inexpressive as rare as were these relics of bygone dynasties and molding epochs, there was one other object for which the master would have given everything else in the museum of curiosities, and the secret which no eyes but his own had explored. On a sepulchred tab that once formed a portion of the architrave of the cave temple at Elfanta, was a splendid marble miniature 4 feet high of that miracle of Saracen architecture, the Taj Mahal at Agra. The elaborate carving resembled lacework in the beauty of the airy dome and slender glittering minarets of this mimic tomb of Noor Mahal, and could find no parallel save the superb, matchless original. The richly carved door that closed the arch of the tomb swung back on golden hinges and opened only by a curiously shaped golden key, which never left Mr. Murray's watch chain. Consequently, what filled the penetralia was left of the conjecture of the imaginative, and when his mother expressed a desire to examine it, he merely frowned and said hastily, "That is Pandora's box, minus imprisoned hope. I prefer it should not be opened." Immediately in front of the tomb, he had posted a grim sentinel, a black marble statuette of Moors, modeled from that hideous little brass figure which Spence saw at Florence, representing a skeleton sitting on the ground, resting one arm on an urn. Filled though it was with sparkling bijouterie that would have graced Barberini or Stasi cabinets, the glitter of the room was cold and cheerless. No light, childish feet had ever pattered down the long rows of shining tiles. No gushing, mirthful laughter had ever echoed through the lofty windows. Everything pointed to the past, a classic storied past, but dead as the mummies of Karnak, and treacherously repulsively lustrous as the waves that break in silver circles over the buried battlements and rushing palms and defiled altars of the proud cities of the plain. No rosy memories of early happy manhood lingered here, no dewy gleam of the merry morning life, when hope painted and peopled a smiling world, no magic trifles that prattled of the springtime of a heart that in wandering to and fro through the earth had fed itself with dust and ashes, acrid and bitter, had studiously collected only the melancholy symbols of moldering ruin, desolation, and death, which found its best type in the Taj Mahal that glistened so mockingly as the gaslight flickered over it. A stranger looking upon St. Elmo, Murray, for the first time as he passed the floor, would have found it difficult to realize that only 34 years had plowed those deep, rugged lines in his swarthy and colorless but still handsome face, where midnight orgies and habitual excesses had left their unmistakable plague spot, and Mephistopheles had stamped his signet, blazed, cynical, scoffing, and hopeless he as had stranded his life, and recklessly striding to his grave, trampling upon the feelings of all with whom he associated, at war with a world in which his lordly brilliant intellect would have lifted him to any eminence he desired, and which properly directed he would have made him the benefactor and ornament of the society he snubbed and derided. Like all strong though misguided natures, the power and activity of his mind enhanced his wretchedness, and drove him farther and farther from the path of rectitude, while the consciousness that he was originally capable of loftier, purer aims and nobler pursuits than those that now engrossed his perverted thoughts, rendered him savagely morose. For nearly 15 dreary years, nothing but jeers and oaths and sarcasms had crossed his finely sculpted lips, which had forgotten how to smile, and it was only when the mocking demon of the wine cup looked out from his gloomy gray eyes that his ringing, sneering laugh struck like a dagger to the heart that loved him, that of his proud but ambitious and miserable mother. Tonight, for the first time since his desperate plunge into the abyss of vice conscience which he had believed effectually strangled, stirred feebly, startling him with a faint moan, as unexpected as the echo from Morella's tomb of the resurrection of Lygia, and down the murdered years came wailing ghostly memories, which even his iron will could no longer scrounge to silence. Clamorous as the avenging Erinyes, they refused to be exorcised, and goaded him almost to frenzy. Those sweet, low, timid tones, "I am sorry for you," had astonished and mortified him. To be hated and dreaded was not at all unusual or surprising, but to be pitied and despised was a sensation as novel as humiliating. And the fact that his ferocity failed to intimidate the little vagrant was unpleasantly puzzling. For some time after Edna's departure, he pondered all that had passed between them, and at length he muttered, "How thoroughly she abhors me! If I touch her, the flesh absolutely writhes away from my hand. If I were plague-stricken or a leper, her very eyelids shudder when she looks at me, and I believe she would more willingly confront Apollyon himself. Strange! How she detests me! I have half a mind to make her love me, even despite herself. What a steady, brave look of scorn there was in her splendid eyes when she told me to my face I was sinful and cruel. He set his teeth hard, and his fingers clenched as if longing to crush something, and then came a great revulsion, a fierce spasm of remorse, and his features writhed. Sinful? Aye, cruel. Oh, my lost youth, my cursed and wrecked manhood! If there be a hell blacker than my miserable soul, man has not dreamed of nor language painted it. What would I not give for a fresh, pure, and untrampled heart, such as slumbers peacefully in yonder room, with no damning recollections to scare sleep from her pillow? In innocent childhood, he threw himself into a chair, and hid his face in his hands, and thus an hour went by, during which he neither moved nor sighed. Tearing the veil from the past, he reviewed it calmly, relentlessly, vindictively, and at last, rising, he threw his head back, with his wonted defiant air, his face hardened and darkened as he approached the marble mausoleum and laid his hand upon the golden key. Too late, too late! I cannot afford to reflect. The devil himself would shirk the reading of such a record. He fitted the key to the lock, but paused and laughed scornfully as he slung it back on its chain. Pshaw! I am a fool. After all, I shall not need to see them. The silly, childish mood has passed. He filled a silver goblet with some strong, spicy wine, drank it, and taking down Candide, brightened the gas jets, lighted a fresh cigar, and began to read as he resumed his walk. Lord of himself, that heritage of woe, the fearful empire which the human breast but holds to rob the heart of within of rest. Chapter 7. Mrs. Murray had informed Edna that the gentleman whom she had engaged to instruct her resided in the neighboring town of, and one Monday morning, in August, she carried her to see him, telling her as they drove along that he was the minister of the largest church in the county, and was an old friend of her family, and that she considered herself exceedingly fortunate in having prevailed upon him to consent to undertake her education. The parsonage stood on the skirts of the village, in a square immediately opposite the church, and was separated from it by a wide, handsome street, lined on either side with elm trees. The old-fashioned house was of brick, with a wooden portico jutting out over the front door, and around the slender pillars twined honeysuckle and clematis tendrils, purple with clustering bells, while the walls were draped with luxuriant ivy that hung in festoons from the eaves, and clambered up the chimneys and in the windows. The daily swept walk leading to the gate was bordered with white and purple lilies, flags as the villagers dubbed them, and over the little gate sprang an arch of lattice-work, loaded with Belgian and English honeysuckle, whose fragrant wreaths drooped till they touched the heads of all who entered. When Mrs. Murray and Edna ascended the steps and knocked at the open door bearing the name Allan Hammond, no living thing was visible, save a thrush that looked out shyly from the clematis vines, and after a waiting moment, Mrs. Murray entered unannounced. They looked into the parlor with its cool matting and white curtains and polished old-fashioned mahogany furniture, but the room was unoccupied. Then, passing on to the library or study, where tiers of books rose to the ceiling, they saw through the open window the form of the pastor, who was stooping to gather the violets blooming in the little shaded garden at the rear of the house. A large white cat sunned herself on the strawberry bed, and a mockingbird sang in the myrtle tree that overshadowed the sturdy window. Mrs. Murray called to the minister, and, taking off his straw hat, he bowed and came to meet them. "Mr. Hammond, I hope I do not interrupt you." "No, Ellen, you never interrupt me. I was merely gathering some violets to strew in a child's coffin." "Susan Archer, poor thing, lost her little Winnie last night, and I knew she would like some flowers to sprinkle over her baby." He shook hands with Mrs. Murray, and, turning her to her companion, offered his hand, saying kindly, "This is my pupil Edna, I presume? I expected you several days ago, and am very glad to see you at last. Come into the house, and let us become acquainted at once." As he led the way to the library, talking the while to Mrs. Murray, Edna's eyes followed him with an expression of intense veneration, for he appeared to her a living original of the pictured prophets, the Samuel, Isaiah, and Ezekiel, whose faces she had studied in the large illustrated Bible that lay on the satin cushion in the sitting-room at Le Bocage. 65 years of wrestling and conquests of the quarantma of life had set upon his noble and benignant countenance the seal of holiness, and shed over his placid features the mild, sweet light of a pure, serene heart, of a lofty, trusting, sanctified soul. His white hair and beard had the silvery sheen which seems peculiar to prematurely gray heads, and the snowy mass wonderfully softened the outline of the face, while the pleasant smile on his lips, the warm, cheering light in his bright blue eyes, won the perfect trust, the profound respect, the lasting love and veneration of those who entered the charmed circle of his influence. Learned without pedantry, dignified but not pompous, learned without pedantry, dignified but not pompous, genial and urbane, never forgetting the sanctity of his mission, though never thrusting its credentials into notice, judging the actions of all with leniency, which he denied to his own, zealous without bigotry, charitable yet rigidly just, as free from austerity and its levity. His heart throbbed with warm, tender sympathy for his race. And while none felt his or her happiness complete until his cordial congratulations sealed it, every sad mourner realized that her burden of woe was lighted when poured into his sympathizing ears. The sage counselor of the aged among his flock, he was the loved companion of younger members, in whose juvenile sports and sorrows he was never too busy to interest himself, and it was not surprising that over all classes and denominations he wielded an influence incalculable for good. The limits of one church could not contain his great heart, which went forth yearning love and fellowship to his Christian brethren and co-laborers throughout the world, while the refrain of his daily work was, "Bear ye one another's burdens." So in the evening of a life blessed with bounteous fruitage of good deeds, he walked to and fro in the wide vineyard of God, with a light of peace, of faith and hope, and hallowed resignation shining over his worn and aged face. Drawing Edna to seat beside him on the sofa, Mr. Hammond said, "Mrs. Murray has entrusted your education entirely to me, but before I decide positively what books you will require, I should like to know what particular branches of study you love best. Do you feel disposed to take up Latin?" "Yes, sir, and—" "Well, go on, my dear. Don't hesitate to speak freely. If you please, sir, I should like to study Greek also." "Oh, nonsense, Edna. Women never have any use for Greek. It would only be a waste of your time," interrupted Mrs. Murray. Mr. Hammond smiled and shook his head. "Why do you wish to study Greek? You will scarcely be called upon to teach it." "I should not think that I was well or thoroughly educated if I did not understand Greek and Latin. And beside, I want to read what Solon and Pericles and Demosthenes wrote in their own language." "Why? What do you know about those men?" "Only what Plutarch says." "What kind of books do you read with most pleasure? History and travels? Are you fond of arithmetic?" "No, sir." "But as a teacher you will have much more use for mathematics than for Greek." "I should think that with all my life before me, I might study both. And even if I should have no use for it, it would do me no harm to understand it. Knowledge is never in the way, is it, sir? Is it? Certainly not half so often as ignorance. Very well, you shall learn Greek as fast as you please. I should like to hear you read something. Here's Goldsmith's Deserted Village. Suppose you try a few lines. Begin here at Sweet as the Sound." She read aloud the passage designated, and as he expressed himself satisfied and took the book from her hand, Mrs. Murray said, "I think the child is as in verite a bookworm as I ever knew. But for heaven's sake, Mr. Hammond, do not make her a blue stocking. A blue stocking. Ellen, did you ever see such a genuine blue stocking? I am happy to be able to say that I was never so unfortunate." "You consider yourself lucky, then. I'm not having known Distel, Hannah, Moore, Charlotte Bronte, and Mrs. Browning." To be consistent, of course, I must answer yes. But you know we women are never supposed to understand that term, much less possess the jewel itself. And besides, sir, you take an undue advantage of me, for the women you mention were truly great geniuses. I was not objecting to genius in women. Without those auxiliaries and adjuncts which you deprecate so earnestly, would their narrative genius ever have distinguished them, or charmed and benefited the world? Brilliant success makes blue stockings autocratic, and the world flatters and crowns them. But unsuccessful aspirants are strangled with an offensive sobriquet, than which it were better that they had millstones tied about their necks. After all, Ellen, it is rather ludicrous and seems very unfair that the whole class of literary ladies should be sneered at on account of the color of Stillingfeet's stockings 8 years ago. If you please, sir, I should like to know what the meaning of blue stocking, said Edna. You are in a fair way to understand it if you study Greek, answered Mrs. Murray, laughing at the puzzled expression of the child's countenance. Mr. Hammond smiled and replied, "A blue stocking, my dear, is generally supposed to be a lady neither young, pleasant, nor pretty, and in most instances unmarried, who is unamiable, ungraceful, and untidy, ignorant of all domestic accomplishments and truly feminine acquirements, and ambitious of appearing very learned, a woman whose fingers are more frequently adorned with ink spots than thimble, who holds housekeeping in detestation, and talks loudly about politics, science, and philosophy, who is ugly and learned and cross, whose hair is never smooth, and whose ruffles are never flooded. Is that correct? Is that a correct likeness, Ellen?" "As good as one of Brady's photographs. Take warning, Edna." "The title of blue stocking," continued the pastor, "originated in jest many, many years ago, when a circle of very brilliant, witty, and elegant ladies in London met at the house of Mrs. Vesey to listen and take part in the conversation of some of the most gifted and learned men England has ever produced. One of those gentlemen, Stillingfleet, who always wore blue stockings, was so exceedingly agreeable and instructive that when he chanced to be absent, the company declared the party was a failure without the blue stockings, as he was familiarly called. A Frenchman who heard the circumstance gave these conversational gatherings the name of Bas Bleu, which means blue stocking, and hence you see that in popular acceptation, I mean in public opinion, the humorous title, which was given in compliment to a very charming gentleman, is now supposed to belong to very tiresome, pedantic, and disagreeable ladies. Do you understand the matter now? I do not understand why ladies have not as good a right to be learned and wise as gentlemen. To satisfy you on that point would involve more historical discussion than we have time for this morning. Some day we will look into the past and find a solution to the question. Meanwhile, you may study it as hard as you please, and remember, my dear, that when one woman is considered a blue stocking and tiresomely learned, 20 are more tiresome still because they know nothing. I will obtain all the books you need, and hereafter you must come to me every morning at 9 o'clock. When the weather is good, you can easily walk over from Mrs. Murray's." As they drove homeward, Edna asked, "Has Mr. Hammond a family?" "No, he lost his family years ago." "But why do you ask the question?" "I saw no lady, and I wondered who kept the house in such nice order." "He is a very faithful servant who attends to his household affairs. In your intercourse with Mr. Hammond, be thankful to allude to his domestic afflictions. Be careful not to allude to his domestic afflictions." Mrs. Murray looked searchingly at the girl, as if striving to fathom her thoughts. Then, throwing her head back with the haughty air of which Edna had remarked in St. Elmo, she compressed her lips, lowered her veil, and remained silent and abstracted until they reached home. The comprehensive and very thorough curriculum of studies now eagerly commenced, and Edna, along which she was gently and skillfully guided by the kind hand of the teacher, furnished the mental ailment for which she hungered, gave constant and judicious exercise to her active intellect, and induced her to visit the quiet parsonage library as assiduously as did Horace, Valgius, and Virgil, the gardens of the Esquiline, where Maecenas held his literary assize. Instead of skimming a few books that crammed the brain with unwieldy unwieldy scientific technicalities and pompous philosophic terminology, her range of thought and study gradually stretched out from into a broader, grander cycle, embracing, as she grew older, the anticipation of those great principles that underline modern science and crop out in ever varying phenomena and empirical classifications. Edna's tutors seem impressed with the fallacy of the popular system of acquiring one branch of learning at a time, locking it away as drawers of rubbish, never to be opened, where it moulders in shapeless confusion, till swept out on time ultimately to make room for more recent scientific invoices. Thus, in lieu of the educational plan of furnishing natural philosophy and chemistry this session, and geology and astronomy next term, and taking up moral scientific and criticism the year we graduate, Mr. Hammond allowed his pupil to finish and lay aside none of her studies, but sought to impress upon her the great value of Blackstone's aphorism, for sciences are of a sociable disposition, and flourish best in the neighborhood of each other. Nor is there any branch of learning but may be helped and improved by assistance drawn from other arts. Finding that her imagination was remarkably fertile, he required her, as she advanced in years, to compose essay letters, dialogues, and sometimes orations, all of which were not only written and handed in for correction, but he frequently directed her to recite them from memory, and invite her to assist him, while he dissected and criticized her diction, line of argument, choice of metaphors, or intonation of voice. In these compositions, he encouraged her to seek illustrations from every department of letters, and convert her theme into a focus upon which to pour all the concentrated light which research could reflect, assuring her that what is often denominated far-fetchedness in metaphors furnished not only evidence of the laborious industry of the writer, but as is an implied compliment to the cultured taste and general knowledge of those for whose entertainment or edification they are employed, provided always said metaphors and similes really illustrate, elucidate, and adorn the theme discussed, which, when properly understood. Her favorite plea in such instances was, if Humboldt and Cuvier and Linnaeus and Ehrenberg have made mankind their debtors by scouring the physical cosmos for scientific data, which every living savant devours, assimilates, and reproduces, and in dynamic physiologic or entomologic theories, it is not equally laudable in scholars, orators, and authors. Nay, it is obligatory to them to subsidize the vast cosmos of literature, to circumnavigate the world of belles lettres in search of new hemispheres of thought, and spice islands of illustrations bring their rich gleanings to the public mart, where men barter their intellectual merchandise. Wide as the universe, and free as its winds, should be the range of human mind, yielding allegiance to the axiom that the proper study of mankind is man, and recognizing the fact that history faithfully epitomizes the magnificent triumphs and stupendous failures, the grand capacities and innate frailties of the races. He fostered and stimulated his pupils' fondness for historic investigation, while impressing upon her memory the chronologic sequence of events, not only groped into great epics, the principal dramas over which Clio holds critical tribunal, but so carefully selected her miscellaneous reading that poetry, novels, and biographies and essays reflected light upon the actors of the particular epoch she was studying, and thus through the subtle but imperishable links of association of ideas, chained them in her mind. The extensive library at Le Bocage and the valuable collection of books at the parsonage challenged research, and with a boundless ambition equaled only by her patient, persevering application, Edna devoted herself to the acquisition of knowledge, and astonished and delighted her teacher by the rapidity of her progress and the vigor of and originality of her restless intellect. The notable catholicity of spirit that distinguished Mr. Hammond's character encouraged her to discuss freely the ethical and physiological problems that arrested her attention as she grew older, and facilitated her appreciation and acceptance of the great fact that all bigotry springs from narrow minds and partial knowledge. He taught her that truth, scorning monopolies and deriding parents, leads some valuable element to almost every human system, that ignorance, superstition, and intolerance are the red-handed Huns that ravage society, immolating the pioneers of progress upon the shrine of prejudice, festering science, blindly bent on divorcing natural and revealed truth, which God hath joined together in a holy, eternal wedlock. And while they battle l'orant with every innovation, lock the wheels of human advancement, turning deaf ear to the thrilling cry. Yet I doubt not, though the ages of one increasing purpose runs, and the thoughts of men are widened by the process of the suns. If Carlyle be correct in his declaration, truly a thinking man is the worst enemy of the Prince of Darkness can have. And every time such a one announces himself, there runs a shudder through the nether empire, where new emissaries are trained with new tactics to hoodwink and handcuff him. Who can doubt that the long dynasty of Eblis will instantly terminate, when every people in Christendom, from the frozen shores of Spitzbergen to the green dells of Owaihi, from the shining spires of Europe to the rocky battlements that front the Pacific, shall be filled with meek and holy men of ripe scholarship and restless eloquence, whose scientific erudition keeps pace with their evangelical piety, and whose irreproachable lives attest that their hearts are indeed hallowed temples of that loving charity that suffereth long and is kind, that vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, thinketh no evil, beareth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. While Christ walked to and fro among the palms and poppies of Palestine, glorifying a new and accursed and degraded human nature, unlettered fishermen who mended their nets and trimmed their sails along the blue waves of Galilee, were fit instruments in his guiding hands for the dissemination of his gospel. But when the days of incarnation ended, and Jesus returned to the Father, all the learning and the mighty genius of Saul of Tarsus were required to confront and refute these scoffing sophists who, replete with Philhellenic lore and within sight of the marvelous triglyphs and metropes of the Parthenon, gathered on Mars Hill to defend their marble altars to the unknown God.